Welcome back to Battleground. I'm David Aiken. We are focusing tonight on the federal government's books, the budget, the economy, all of which will be central issues in the unfolding campaign ahead of the 2015 election. We have let the finance minister go. He's got to get back to running the country. Pleased to be joined now by some folks who have some thoughts about how the budget battles ought to go ahead. Start with Dan Nader, a conservative-leaning fellow right now. You like that fellow, Joe Oliver, I'm assuming, and approve heartily of everything he's doing.
I do. I think he's a fantastic finance minister.
All right, we've got that out of the way. Will it be enough in 2015? In other words, it's just a stable, steady hand. Is the world still an uncertain place in the eyes of voters that they won't want to risk change? Because that's going to be clearly, as the minister said, that's what he's going to be telling voters.
I think the world is still a very uncertain place in many different ways. On the security situation, that we saw that the tragic events that happened in Sydney last night and this morning. On the economic front, oil is about a half to a third what it was 6 months ago.
Or something like that today.
That is going to have a major impact on the global economy, a major impact on the Canadian economy. And it plays right into the strategy that the Prime Minister has laid out, which is to say that he is the one who will provide the responsible leadership to keep our economy strong and give some security to the people.
So far as we know from the Liberal platform ahead, they seem to be campaigning a little bit left. In other words, it may be some spending programs, not as quickly paying down the debt. But you could see there's conservative groups, Canadian Taxpayers Federation is a good one, that don't like the idea that we're not paying the debt down far enough. Who knows? Maybe the Liberals can come out of somewhere and whoop, they're coming at you from a slightly different way.
I've got a lot of respect for my friend Aaron Woodrick with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I hear what he has to say. I think the Prime Minister, this is again a reminder, this isn't an ideological conservative Prime Minister. He is a center-right Prime Minister. I think what he's really trying to do is he's trying to own the middle ground. The Liberals say that they're going to run on big infrastructure spending, so he promises a few billion infrastructure spending, an affordable level, so that he can then say when they come out with their big plan, that's unaffordable. I have an affordable alternative. The Liberals say we need to spend more on academics and on science. Prime Minister came out a week or two ago with a plan to fund science universities.
There's some more funding for research networks today.
Exactly. So what the Prime Minister will then be able to say when Trudeau comes out with a big plan, he'll say, that's a far left radical plan. It will require raising taxes on middle class families. I have a more responsible plan.
This Conservative government has only maybe lowered income taxes once. In fact, all that happened was confirming an income tax cut announced by Ralph Goodale. So we've never seen an income tax cut in 10 years of a Conservative government. We've got a thicket of tax credits for any number of things, some of which I benefit from, some of which you do. But you'd think a Conservative government would simplify perhaps a tax code, and income taxes cuts are good things, cutting consumption taxes are bad things.
I believe that any tax cut is a good tax cut. We can argue about which ones are better, but you also have to remember, this is a government that started with a very broadly based tax cut, taking 2% off the GDP. Very visible every day to Canadians, appreciated every day in people's pocketbooks. And now what they're delivering is more tax cuts aimed at families, saying that, it's families with young children, families with any children who have the most trouble making ends meet. And as the finance minister just said, he has delivered a tax cut that is going to help low and middle income families the most. And now the two opposition leaders are going to have to say, this isn't a question between how much we pay off the debt versus spending promises. They'll have to decide about spending promises. If they want those spending promises, they're going to have to raise taxes back up on those low and middle income families. They're going to have to defend that to voters in the next election.
All right, Dan Nader, hold on. I want to bring in a couple more of our friends in Toronto. Warren Kinsella and Adam Giambrone are standing by. And Adam, let me just start with you first, because I want to talk about the things the opposition will do. I know Thomas Mulcair doesn't like income splitting, just like Justin Trudeau doesn't like income splitting. But so far as I can tell, Mulcair would keep it if he becomes Prime Minister in October. He'd keep the increased child care tax benefit. He'd keep the extra benefits you get on your child care expenses. And I'd get $15 a day daycare. I'm thinking, what's not to like if I vote New Democrat? I'm going to get even richer as a parent.
Well, he's been very clear about this in terms of not wanting to wade back into discussions around tax policy. That gets very difficult. I think Canadians, it's very clear people like tax cuts. They don't like tax increases. Some people have more appreciation for the value of taxes in terms of spending than others. But the fact is that Canadians are not in the mood for looking for tax increases. I think Trudeau's going to find this. And Mulcair has been very clear to try try to separate it, so not to go down that route in terms of getting lost in that morass of whether or not you're going to provide tax increases. He's been very clear there will be no tax increases, but we know from the federal, the budgets over the coming years that there is room to, as long as you don't propose new tax cuts, there is room for limited new spending. And I think what you're going to see from the New Democrats is a program laid out, and one of them has been around a national child care program. I suspect a few more infrastructure promises will be made as well, but as long as they fit within a fiscal framework that allows you to go forward with those programs and not specifically raise taxes, or if there are any specifically, if there are any discussion around tax increases, I would suspect that they'll be very small and targeted, although to date he hasn't outlined any of those. And I think that's what we're going to see moving forward over the next year as it becomes clear what the NDP proposes for the next government mandate.
Warren, let me ask you, it's pretty obvious that the current Conservatives are going for parents. We see it in these tax cuts, their communications plans. I think with their, Trudeau would legalize pot ads is aimed at suburban parents, parents of teenage kids, et cetera, for good or bad. Trudeau's coming back with "I'm for the middle class." Is that enough, you think? Or does he, I'm assuming, needs to put some more policies in the window?
Well, let's be honest, really all three parties are targeting the middle class. I mean, even almost no Canadian sees themselves as not middle class. Even people who have very low incomes, even many Canadians who have very high incomes, if you ask them, and they honestly respond, they say they're middle class. So I think you're going to see there's this fight for the middle class. It's where all the votes are, however we choose to define it. I think the NDP have a challenge in terms of they've got their Quebec base, which is has more of a unique perspective, and their challenge really, and this is the Conservatives and Liberals, are going to be around Ontario. How do you reach out, win more seats in those provinces? And this is the same discussion all three parties are going to be. Without Ontario, it's very hard to form.
Okay, hold on a second, Adam. I wanted to see if I get Warren to jump in on that one.
Well, you've heard of income splitting, now you've got pundit splitting.
You've got pundit splitting, yes, exactly. I'll take and it's capped at 2 minutes each. All right.
I think we're all being a little bit too nice to the Conservative Party here. I think they've got a problem, David, and they need to settle on a narrative. I mean, last year, I think the view of most economists is they were actually in a structural surplus at that point, if you factored in their so-called reserves. And the world has changed dramatically. And you saw it in that interview you did with the Minister of Finance, and it was very interesting. He was trying to do what we used to call sucking and blowing at the same time. He's saying, well, Europe is in a precipitous state, and China is in decline, and we've got to be careful. We need a stable hand at the tiller in the form of Stephen Harper, but at the same time, happy times are here again. And you can't do both of those at the same time. And one thing that is particularly so is that with the price per barrel that we are now experiencing, we, a resource nation, are looking at, all of their projections that they had for the coming fiscal, I think, are a joke. Because the bottom, at least $3 billion annualized, is gone from what they were looking at in terms of revenue from the petroleum sector. So I don't believe anything these guys say, and I think they're just trying to fudge their way through because they don't know where oil is going to end up. They don't know where Europe or China is going to end up, and they're just hoping we won't notice. And I think plenty of people are going to notice.
Of course, this government ran up the biggest deficits in our history. And many would say, well, they had to, and it was the right thing to do. I'm asking Warren again. And yet, they, it seems to me, have successfully convinced the world of the pundit class that it's Liberals who are tax and spenders. Liberals can't be trusted with the purse. And of course, your old boss, Jean Chrétien, did a heck of a job with his pal, his good pal, Paul Martin, to get rid of the deficit and really build the base that the current Conservatives then had to build from.
Yeah, and they always do that, as you point out. And I remember Kim Campbell ran an ad when Mr. Chrétien was talking about the necessity of investing in infrastructure, which Prime Minister Harper did in 2009. And they ran an ad making fun of us of a dump truck. Remember that one with all the loonies falling out of the back, or quarters falling out of the back. But, it was a dumb ad because a large number of Canadians, and I think Adam would probably agree, think that governments should make sensible expenditures sometime in infrastructure and healthcare and education and other things. And so they kind of made our case for us, and that helped us to win that election in '93. The problem here they've got is I can't tell what story they're trying to tell. And they're trying to have it both ways, and that is a very dangerous way to enter an election campaign when you're trying to say two things at once, that I've got a surplus, I've got lots of money to spend on you, the middle class, but let's all be careful and worried because of China and oil and Europe. So I don't think they know what they're doing.
Dan Nader, you know there's some blue liberals out there who would very much have appreciated what Chrétien and Martin did. If you think of a guy like John Manley. But now, I guess, current memory is we have liberals like Kathleen Wynne in Ontario, who is not, she is the tax and spend liberal. We go east, and we have deficits and red ink, and those are all the liberals that are in our current political discussion. Does the federal government take advantage of these provincial liberals and campaign against them?
I mean, but I think if you look at Kathleen Wynne, you see that even Kathleen Wynne is trying to position herself as the middle of the road. I think she said today in a speech she gave that in the last election, the way she won was she had somebody saying government's the problem, and she had somebody on her left saying government's the solution to everything, and she was the reasonable one in the middle saying actually government can solve some problems. I think that's actually the position that Stephen Harper has carved out for himself, that he is the middle of the road choice. Now he's facing two parties to his left and nobody to his right, but he's still carved out that position where he says things like infrastructure and research and healthcare, yes, there is a legitimate role and there will be reasonable government spending, but not so much that we break the bank. And that's the groundwork that he's laying right now for the next election.
Dan Nader, Warren Kinsella, Adam Giambrone are in Toronto. They're going to stick around for just a bit. We're going to take a quick break and talk more about Joe Oliver, the politician. Is he the right guy for the job? Still ahead. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to Battleground. I'm David Aiken. We're talking about the big issue for Battleground Canada 2015, budget priorities. Warren Kinsella, Jim Flaherty was a pretty good communicator. He was definitely a partisan. There's no question about it. But you often ended up sort of laughing as he hit you in the jaw with his jabs. Joe Oliver's not that kind of communicator. Can he be an effective front man for the government's budget policies over the next year?
It's funny you asked this. Adam and I were talking about this very question during the break. I personally think Joe Oliver is a better communicator than his predecessor. You know, and the test of that, David, as you know, you having worked there, is Joe Oliver goes on the CBC. Joe Oliver goes on the CBC to take the tough questions and comes out of the experience doing rather well. I can't think of any other member of cabinet who does that. And I think he would be doing that with the support and knowledge of PMO, because he's got this kind of genial, aw shucks way about him, and it's hard to get mad at him.